Up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz and this is Creating Crime Time. I'm your host. I sit down and I'm going to talk about some true crime. So today we're going to be talking about the case of Shanda Sharer and her murder. So Shanda, she was tortured and she was burned to death in Madison, Indiana by 4 teenage girls. And Shanda was 12 at the age of her death. So Shanda was born at the Pineville Community Hospital in Pineville, Kentucky on June 6th of 1979 to her parents, Stephen and Jacqueline. Her parents divorced, her mom remarried, and then the family moved to Louisville. So this is where she would attend 5th and 6th grade at the St. Paul School, and she was a cheerleader. And she was also on the volleyball team and on the softball team. So when her mom ended up divorcing again, the family then moved in June of 1991 to New Albany, Indiana, and this is where Shanda would go to Hazelwood Middle School. Although early in that school year, she would end up being transferred to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which is a Catholic school in New Albany, and she joined the basketball team there. So the 4 girls that are involved in this case is Melinda Lovelace, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Toni Lawrence. Each of these girls in particular have endured emotional, sexual, physical trauma. Melinda and Lori are the 2 main accomplices in this case, and then there's Hope and Toni. So basically what happened is Melinda was dating a girl named Amanda, and this was in 1990, and at the time Melinda was 14. So Melinda, after her parents divorced, after her father divorced her mom and her mom remarried, she began acting very out of control. She would get into fights at school, she was depressed, and it resulted in her having to seek professional counseling. Well, in March of 1991, she came out to her mom. Her mom was initially severely furious about it, but then she accepted it. So as the year progressed in 1991, Melinda and Amanda's relationship started to deteriorate because they started dating in 1990, and then Melinda finally comes out to her mom in 1991. So that would put a strain on your relationship, especially not being fully open about it. So Amanda would then meet Shanda, and they met during the fall semester at Hazelwood Middle School or junior high school. And they met when they got into a fight with each other. They ended up becoming friends while they were in detention after the whole altercation happened, and then they started exchanging romantic letters with one another. Well, Melinda found out, and that caused an insane amount of jealousy in regards to Shanda and Amanda's relationship. So in October, Amanda and Shanda end up going to a school dance, and this is where Melinda ended up confronting them. And although Melinda and Amanda never formally ended their relationship, Melinda then started dating another girl. So here's the thing that I don't really understand is that Melinda couldn't get over the fact that Amanda wasn't with her and she started dating another girl, but yet Melinda started dating another girl. This is the weird thing that I don't understand. So this brings us to the night of January 10th of 1992. This is when all of this loveliness happens. This is when Hope, Toni, and Lori, the other 3 girls that I mentioned. Now, mind you, Lori's 17 and Hope and Toni are 15. So they drive in Lori's car to Madison to Melinda's house. Well, from Madison to Melinda's house in New Albany. And Toni and Hope even though they were friends with Lori, they had never met Melinda. Now, Melinda was 16 at the time. So when they arrived, they ended up borrowing some clothes from Melinda. This is when Melinda showed them a knife and telling them that she was going to scare Shanda with said knife. So while Lori, Hope, and Tony had never met Shanda prior to that night, Lori already knew of the plan to intimidate Shanda. Shanda was 12. So here comes these teenage girls that are coming to intimidate you. You know what I mean? So Melinda then would explain the whole situation to Tony and Hope and how she disliked them and how Shanda was a copycat and how she stole her girlfriend. When in retrospect, it was Amanda that left her and she just spun it in the wrong way. So the whole events of the murder happened between January 10th and January 11th. So after, they meet with Melinda at the house, Lori then takes Hope. Lori lets Hope drive the car to Jeffersonville. This is where Shanda is staying with her dad on the weekends. So they stop at McDonald's while they're en route to the house and they ask for directions. They would arrive at Shanda's house before dark. So Melinda instructed Hope and Tony to go to the front door and introduce themselves as Amanda's friends, and then invite Shanda to come with them to come see Amanda, who is waiting for them at the Witch's Castle, which is like a ruined stone house that's in the middle of it's on an isolated hill that overlooks the Ohio River, or the other name is called Mistletoe Falls. So Shanda told them that she couldn't go because her parents were awake and for them to come back around midnight. That way she could sneak out. So at first Melinda was upset, but then Hope and Tony assured her that they would return for Shanda later. 4 girls then would cross the river. Yep, the girls would, they crossed the river and attended a punk rock show where they saw the band Sunspring at the Audubon State Park. And this was near Interstate 65. So this is where Tony and Hope lost interest and they ended up hooking up with some random boys in Lori's car. So eventually the 4 girls left for Shanda's house again, and during the ride Melinda said she couldn't wait to kill Shanda. So this is the first time where she's actually spoken about killing Shanda. However, she only mentioned that she was going to scare her with the knife. So you see what I mean? There's she knew her true intentions, but she didn't tell them. So they arrived at Shanda's house at 12:30. Tony refused to go get Shanda, so Lori and Hope went to the front door. Melinda hid in a blanket in the backseat of the car with the knife. So Hope told Shanda that Amanda was still at Witch's Castle. So Shanda was hesitant to go, but yet she agreed. So she changed her clothes. And then she proceeded to come out. I think she just wanted to look nice for Amanda because, she was in a relationship with her yeah. So Hope then began asking Shanda about her relationship with Amanda. And this is when Melinda sprang out of the back seat and put the knife to Shanda's throat. And this is when she began to interrogate her about the sexual relationship she was having with Amanda. So they then drove to Utica and the Witch's Falls. Lori told the girls about the local legend and how the house was owned by 9 witches and that the townspeople burned down the house to get rid of the witches. At Witch's Castle, this is when they took turns. So basically what happened is they bound Shanda. Shanda was crying. This is then when Lori and Melinda would start taunting her and telling her she had pretty hair and how they wanted to cut it off, and it frightened Shanda. Then Melinda started taking off Shanda's rings, and she was handing them as tokens off to the other girls. At some point, Hope took Shanda's Mickey Mouse watch and danced to the tune that it played. So Lori would further taunt Shanda, claiming that the house was filled with human remains and that Shanda would be next. To further threaten her, Lori then retrieved a shirt with a smiley design from the car and lit it on fire, but immediately feared that the fire would be spotted by passing cars, so the girls left with Shanda. During the car ride, Shanda continued to beg them to bring her home. Melinda ordered Shanda to take off her bra and then hand it over to Hope, who then Hope put on the bra while basically she's driving and then she puts on Shanda's bra. That's basically what it is. I don't understand that. So eventually they became lost. They stopped at the gas station. They covered Shanda with a blanket. Lori went in to ask for directions, and Tony then called a boy she knew in Louisville. They chatted up for a little bit and then told them she was getting back in the car and leaving. After some time, this is when they would go to the edge of some woods near Lori's house in Madison. So this is where a lot of the torture starts. So Lori led them to a dark abandoned building. So Lori then led them to a dark abandoned building off of a logging road, and this is in a densely forested area. So Tony and Hope were frightened and they ended up staying in the car. But Lori and Melinda ended up making Shanda strip down to her underwear. This is when Melinda would then beat Shanda with her fists. Melinda repeatedly slammed Shanda's face into her knee. This resulted in oh my goodness, falling apart. You're welcome for my craziness. So this resulted in Shanda cutting her mouth on her own braces, so she had blood coming from her mouth. Melinda then tried to slash Shanda's throat, but the knife was too dull, so it was execution wise wasn't good. Hope then came out of the car to hold down Shanda. Shanda and Lori then proceeded to take turns stabbing Shanda in the chest. They strangled her with a rope until she was unconscious, and then that's when they placed her back in the trunk of the car and told the other girls that Shanda was dead. So the girls drove to Lori's house nearby, went inside, they drank some soda, and they cleaned themselves up. When they heard Shanda screaming in the trunk, Lori went out with a paring knife and then stabbed her a few more times. She came back in, covered in blood. After she washed up, she told the girls about, told them their future with her rune stones. So Lori believed that she was a witch, and believed that she was possessed by a witch's spirit, and that she had all of these magical powers. Hope and Tony stayed behind as Lori and Melinda went cruising, and they were driving down near the town of Cannon. Shanda continued to cry, and she was making gurgling noises in the trunk, and this is because she was basically almost choking on her own blood. So Lori stopped the car. When they opened the trunk, Shanda sat up. She was covered in blood. Her eyes were rolling in the back of her head, and she was unable to speak. This is when Lori attacked her with the tire iron until she was quiet. And she claimed that this is when Shanda's head caved in. And then she told Melinda to smell it. That smell that is coming off of her. Yeah. There's also reports that Shanda was sexually assaulted with that tire iron as well. And this wasn't just once that she was hit with the tire iron. It was off and on for hours as the girls continued their joyride through the countryside. So Melinda and Lori returned to Lori's house before daybreak to clean up again. Hope asked about Shanda, and then Lori laughed while talking about the torture. I guess the conversation woke up Lori's mom, who then yelled at her daughter about being out late and bringing home other girls, so Lori agreed to take him home. This is when she drove to a burn pile where they opened up the trunk to stare at Shanda. Tony refused to look at her. Hope sprayed Shanda with Windex and taunted, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" So Shanda is still alive throughout all of this. Like, she's been beaten to a pulp. She's been stabbed so many times. They tried to slit her throat. And now she's being sprayed with Windex. So, the girls then get back in the car and they drive to a gas station. This gas station is near Madison Consolidated High School. This is when they put some gas in the car, and then they buy a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Well, Lori empties the Pepsi bottle and refills it with gasoline. They then drive north of Madison, past Jefferson Proving Grounds, to Lemon Road, and this is off of US Route 421. And this is a place that Hope knows. Tony remained in the car while Lori and Hope wrapped Shanda, who is still alive, in a blanket, and then they carried her to a field by the gravel road. Lori then made Hope pour the gasoline on Shanda, and then they set her on fire. Melinda was not convinced that Shanda was dead, so they returned a few minutes later after they left initially, after first setting her ablaze, to pour the rest of the gasoline on her. They then went to McDonald's at 9:30 and they celebrated with breakfast, where one of them laughed, actually all of them laughed, and they joked that Shanda's body looked like one of the sausages they were eating. Tony ended up calling a friend, and she talked to this friend about what had happened. Lori then dropped Tony and Hope off at their homes, and then she returned to her own home with Melinda. Lori and Melinda talked about the murder, and Amanda would be told what happened and that they killed Shanda and arranged to pick her up later that day. So a friend of Melinda's, her name is Crystal Wathan, she went over to Melinda's house and they told her what happened as well. Then these 3 girls drove to pick up Amanda, and then they went back to Melinda's house, where they told Amanda everything that happened. Both Amanda and Crystal didn't believe the story at first, until Lori showed them the trunk of her car, where Shanda's bloody handprints were. Amanda was absolutely horrified, and she wanted to go home. When they pulled up in front of her house, Melinda kissed Amanda, told her that she loved her, and pleaded with her to not tell anyone. Amanda promised she wouldn't tell anybody before she entered the house. But see, the thing is that Tony already told somebody that didn't know the whole situation. So later in the morning, thank you, truck. Later in the morning of January 11th of 1992, 2 brothers from Cannon were driving down that same road, and this is when they noticed a body on the side of the road. They initially thought it was a mannequin, but after exiting the vehicle, that's when they noticed it was the body of a burned child. They called the police around 10:55 a.m. and were asked to go back to where the body was. That way the cops knew where to go. So a Jefferson County sheriff comes, and detectives, they begin to investigate. They collect forensics evidence at the scene. They initially suspect that it was a drug deal gone wrong and didn't believe that the crime had been committed by locals. It was also noted that Shanda's body was laid in a suggestive way, which very obviously meant that this was done on purpose and with true intention. It was also found that the victim's face, so Shanda's face and hands, were burnt in an attempt to keep her unrecognizable and unidentifiable. Shanda's father noticed that his daughter was nowhere early on the day of January 11th, and began calling friends, calling neighbors, and he even called his ex-wife, Shanda's mom, Jackie, at around 1:45 p.m. to see if she knew where she was, and they didn't. So they ended up filing a missing persons report in Clark County. At 8:20 p.m., Tony Lawrence and Hope Rippey went to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with their parents, and they were hysteric, like in a hysterical state. They both gave statements identifying the burnt victim as Shanda. They also named Lori Tackett and Melinda Lovelace as the other two that were involved, and they described what happened that night. So now this becomes an inter-county investigation. So the Jefferson County Sheriff ended up contacting the Clark County Sheriff, and this is when they were able to match the body with Shanda's missing persons report. And also this is when they started the dental record identification process, and it positively identified Shanda as the victim. Both Melinda and Lori were arrested on January 12th. The bulk of the evidence for their arrest warrants was the admission of guilt from Tony Lawrence and Hope Rippey. Prosecution immediately declared that they wanted to try both of them as adults. For several months, no information was released on this case because of the sensitivity of this case. It's 4 teenage girls that killed a 12-year-old, a preteen. That and all the underlying underneath it, the premeditation, and that leads into the jealousy, the heartbreak, a love triangle. This is a murderous love triangle, and they didn't want the media to get involved in any of the information. Yeah. So all 4 girls were tried as adults, and to avoid the death penalty, all 4 of them accepted plea bargains. So, Lori and Melinda were sentenced to 60 years to life in prison. Lori was released in 2018, and she served probation for 1 year. Melinda was released in September of 2019. Hope was sentenced to 60 years with 10 years suspended for mitigating circumstances, plus 10 years of medium supervision probation. So there was an appeal that happened, and this ended up reducing the sentence to about 35 years. So, and this is in exchange for cooperation for Tony. Tony was allowed to plead guilty on 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to a max of 20 years. So all of the girls were sentenced. Melinda ended up appealing her sentence in 2007, and this is when she admitted to all of the sexual trauma that happened in her childhood, and her lawyer put forth the argument that she didn't have the correct state of mind due to the trauma that she had endured. So basically what happened is they decided that what they wanted to do is they wanted to try and get a lesser sentence for her, and because she was 16 at the time, and because she was underage, they felt it wasn't right for her basically to be tried as an adult. What ended up happening is that Melinda would be eligible for parole in 15 years from 2008. And after everything was said and done, is they kept this original plea bargain that she had, but they added in the eligibility within 15 years, which she ended up being released in 2019. So Tony was released in 2000 after serving 9 years in prison, and she remained on parole until December of 2002. Hope Rippey was released in 2006 after serving 14 years of her original sentence, and she remained on supervised parole until 2011. Lori, as I said, she was released in 2018 and literally on the 26th anniversary of Shanda's death. So January 11th of 2016, she was released after serving 26 years in prison. And she had to complete an additional year of parole, like probation, afterwards. So she wouldn't be fully clear until 2019. Yeah. So that is the murder of Shanda Sharer. I hope you guys learned something from this case, and I can't wait to give you guys more cases for Valentine's Day. Bye, guys!